Hello everyone, welcome to History with Ashley, Brock, and Ashley. Today we're going to learn about the World War II. To be more specific, the bombing of Japanese cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki. However, the main question we're considering today is the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki justifiable? Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's start with a little intro and background knowledge.
In Hiroshima, women are starting off with their daily chores, men are going to work, and children are going to school with no clue whatsoever of bombing.
The American plane Boeing B-29 Superfortress Enola Gay leaves the island of Tinian for Hiroshima, Japan. The weather is clear. If all works well, the bomb would work as they hope.
Suddenly, the Japanese warning radar net detects an American headed for the southern part of Japan. The radio broadcast warns the citizens to go to the air raid shelter, but they thought that the plane was merely a military observation.
The crew and equipment functioned well, and everything was working exactly as planned.
There is an American airplane hovering overhead.
At 8 a.m., the plane finally reaches Hiroshima. The pilot drops the bomb, the little boy.
And then
the explosion.
In a blink of an eye, the whole place is in ashes. All the inhabitants with 4.4 miles of ground zero of the bomb are vaporized, leaving the whole town with nothing but rubber, ash, and silence. Whether the atomic bomb is in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was justified is still controversial now, 70 years after the bombing itself. On one hand, the bomb may have saved more lives, both for Americans and the Japanese. The bomb would have also led to decreased length in World War II. On the other hand, the bomb was lawfully and morally unjust, and it wasn't really necessary because there were more other methods that had less dramatic effects.
Let's think about it this way. If the US did not drop the atomic bomb, what would have happened? Would the Japanese have surrendered? Ideally, the US would have invaded the Japanese homeland with conventional weapons, or they would have blockaded Japan to limit their resources. If the US did invade Japan, that would have cost at least the number of Japanese lost from the atomic bomb, plus at least 300,000 American lives from the fighting. If the US blockaded Japan, it would have taken several more years of war, therefore extending the period of World War II. In fact, the Americans and partly the British already had this invasion plan for the unconditional surrender of Japan, called Operation Downfall. The first invasion, called Operation Olympic, would happen on November 1st, 1945, and would land American troops on Japan and start an amphibious assault. Divisions of soldiers and Marines would land on Kyushu and the southernmost Japanese home islands after an aerial and naval bombardment. The second invasion, called Operation Coronet, would happen on March 1st, 1946, and this would send 25 divisions against the 1 million defenders on the Japanese main island of Honshu and the Tokyo Plain. This operation called for using the Marine Corps, the Pacific Navy, the 7th Army Air Force, the 8th, the 10th Air Force, and the American Far Eastern Air Force. This includes more than 1.5 million soldiers, plus 3 million more to be involved in the assaults. Compared to the atomic bomb that didn't risk any of the American lives, this operation proves that both the Americans and the Japanese lives would have been saved. Time-wise, Operation Downfall would have taken almost a year, while the atomic bomb only took 3 days and merely 45 seconds for the bomb to take effect right after it was dropped from the airplanes. Therefore, the only reasonable option of saving money and reducing the time of war was to drop the atomic bombs and force them to surrender. So rather than starving and killing millions of people, rather than risking millions of lives of your own troops. Dropping the bomb was the quickest and the most economically efficient way to force them to surrender.
Japan never surrenders unless something very powerful comes into play. In the history of wars and battles before the atomic bomb, there has never been a case where Japan has surrendered. So in an American point of view, they are pretty confident that Japan would not have surrendered. If it were not for the atomic bomb, Japan believes in something called the Bishidao, which literally translates to the way of the warrior. This is an old samurai belief very similar to the concept of chivalry. The qualities accepted for an ideal knight, which is courage, honor, loyalty, and self-sacrifice. Surrendering is never an option for the Imperial Japanese. An example of this Bishidao belief is kamikaze attacks. These attacks show that the Japanese soldiers are willing to die for their country rather than to give up. That was exactly why America needed something powerful, something more powerful than an invasion with confidential needs in combat, something that would really dig into their psychology to break the hearts of the Japanese and make them want to surrender for the first time. And just along the way came the development of the atomic bomb, and now was the perfect time to use it. In just a few days after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese Imperial Hirohito announced to the Japanese people on August 14th that they would surrender, calling on end to the World War II. But
before everyone starts clapping and appreciating what America did, let's look at the Japanese civilians, the poor innocent civilians who were unaware of what was coming next.
As far as the army is concerned, civilians getting killed did not really matter.
First, let's take a look at the Code of Conduct. Here I have the copy of the League of Nations resolutions. If I flip over to Protection of Civilian Populations Against Bombing from Air in Case of War, September 30th, 1938.
It states that the intentional bombing of civilian populations is illegal, and any attack on legitimate military objectives must be carried out in such a way that civilian populations in the neighborhood are not bombed through negligence.
Despite these warnings, and despite them being aware of the repercussions everyone will have to face after dropping the bomb, the US dropped the bomb anyway, and committing what should have been labeled a war crime. Although the United States was not part of the League of Nations, it is still an ethical norm not to drop bombs on these innocent civilians and follow what the rest of the world approves upon. This was morally unjust, causing approximately 135,000 casualties in Hiroshima and 64,000 in Nagasaki, many who were vaporized instantly or suffered a slow death of a few hours to even a few years due to excessive radiation exposure, and many others who were inflicted with physical and psychological damage beyond repair, leaving them with scars that remain for the rest of their lives.
I was 13 years old. I was a normal, ordinary girl, I think. To me, often wonder too, if I didn't get a bomb, what kind of life I had? Often I thought about it. Completely different, of course. Maybe I just ordinary met men and get married, have a housewife and mother and things. My fantasy goes different direction.
If I die here, there will be no one left to put flowers on everyone's graves.
いろんな被爆者います。しかしその中で私のようにね。
There's no one else like me. No one was directly hit, suffered such severe injuries, and spent 3 years and 7 months in hospital. I have to see the end of nuclear weapons with my own eyes. I have to live until.
In November 1946, President Truman issued the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission to conduct epidemiological and genetic studies on 100,000 survivors of the bombing and their children. The study found a higher incidence of cancer, especially leukemia, among these survivors. They also found more birth defects, miscarriage, and earlier menopause in female survivors who were pregnant at the time of the bombing. Since 1946, they have found delayed radiation effects, which led to another 160,000 deaths. Now, can we really say that the action of ruining the lives of the Japanese was moral and just?
Some believe that the bombing of the Hiroshima and the Nagasaki was a necessary evil for the good of many, and that without the bombing, Japan would not have surrendered. However, would the war have really not ended if the atomic bomb were not dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Let's think about this. Before the atomic bomb, Japan was going through huge amounts of pressure. Japan's navy was almost destroyed, Japan's islands were under a naval blockade, and its city was being constantly bombed. And Japan was under the threat of Soviet entry. I think that if your country is going through this much, and if you have nowhere else to go, you would surrender and hold up the white flag. And yes, this was exactly what Japan was going to do. In fact, Prince Konoye of Japan already thought that Japan was defeated on February 14, 1945, when meeting the emperor, which was before the nuclear bomb. So, if stopping the war and gaining Japan's surrender was not the main reason for dropping the atomic bomb, what could have been the main reason? Firstly, the United States and its scientists wanted to test the new technology of a nuclear bomb. Prior to the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, no bombs that devastating was dropped before. The United States knew that after the war, they wouldn't have any justifiable reason to test this horrendous weapon. And during this time, such an expensive project as the nuclear bomb was not acceptable to rust away. This provided the United States an incentive to quickly deploy the nuclear bomb on Japan before Japan's surrender, and it was too late for the testing. What other evidence do we have? Throughout the war, numerous cities in all over Japan have been bombed. However, Hiroshima, a very, very flat city which is perfect for a nuclear bomb test, had not been bombed once. Weird, huh? Many historians say that the reason for this action was that the United States was preparing to drop the atomic bomb. If the United States had bombed Hiroshima with its smaller bombs, then it would have made it harder for US to determine how devastating the nuclear bomb could be, because you couldn't tell the difference between the damage done previously by a smaller bomb and the damage done by a nuclear bomb. Having this reason in mind, you can say that the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is not justifiable because the USA had killed millions of civilians just so they could solve their curiosity and see how big their explosion would turn out. Another more real reason that the United States would have wanted to drop the bomb on Japan was because the United States wanted to get rid of the Soviet Union out of the picture and keep Asia free from communism. If we look at the big picture, at this point, which is right before the nuclear bombing, USSR had been busy with the wars up in Europe, fighting Hitler. However, Germany loses the war, and now USSR's hands weren't tied behind its back anymore. This allows USSR to intrude and help out US in the Pacific War. In fact, USSR promises the United States that they would come to aid United States to defeat Japan. However, at this point, all the hard work has been done to defeat Japan. Like mentioned previously, USA was on the verge of victory and could not afford to share the victory with the USSR after losing so much to achieve this victory. This also provided incentive for the nuclear bomb, even though it was not a more moralistic way to end the war. The nuclear bomb was the quickest means to bring Japan to its knees and to fulfill its selfish needs to keep communist powers of USSR out of the Pacific War. United States has yet another strong but selfish excuse to drop the bomb. Therefore, at this viewpoint, we can say that the United States might say that the nuclear bomb was necessary to end the war. We know that even though it was the quickest way and the most cheap way to end it, the consequences were that millions of innocent civilians would face death on spot. And the nuclear bomb was dropped by the United States to fulfill its selfish needs, like testing the bomb before the war ends and keeping communism out of Japan.
Still in the war, death is inevitable. The atomic bombs might have saved more lives. It might have forced Japan to surrender, ending the war and causing no more numbers added to the death toll.
I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan.
Newsmen rushed the president's report to a waiting world. And through the early evening, Tuesday, August 14th, the fateful news is flashed. In New York City, as throughout a rejoicing nation and world, vast throngs of grateful, happy people celebrate the end of fighting, the dawn of peace. 2 million New Yorkers jam Times Square. It's official. It's all over. It's total victory.
After dropping the bombs, President Truman said the following in a radio broadcast.
I realize the tragic significance of the atomic bomb. Having found the bomb, we have used it. We have used it against those who attacked us without warning at Pearl Harbor. against those who have starved and beaten and executed American prisoners of war, against those who have abandoned all pretense of obeying international laws of warfare. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of young Americans. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war. Only a Japanese surrender will stop us.
But at the same time, was it necessary and was it moral? Dwight Eisenhower, a former president of the United States, stated in his book, A Mandate for Change, that
during his recitation of the relevant facts, I have been conscious of a feeling of depression, and so I voiced him to my grave misgivings. First, on the basis of my belief that Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary, and secondly, because I thought that our country should avoid shocking world opinion by the use of weapon, whose employment was, I thought, no longer mandatory as a measure to save American lives. It was my belief that Japan was, at that very moment, seeking some way to surrender with a minimum loss of face. The secretary was deeply perturbed by my attitude.
These contrasting views from two of the most influential figures in the history of the United States teaches us that the justification of the atomic bombs have no right or wrong answer. We are only presented with the facts. In the end, it is up to our own individual thoughts, what we perceive as moral and just, and that will be the right answer for us individuals.